Hello and welcome back to this our 40-second live stream. Answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. A tribute to Douglas Adams. This is a live stream where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible, and that's for our new viewers, because in case you don't know, Inspiring Philosophy released his updated Exodus Rediscovered video today, his documentary. In fact, just 4 hours ago. And it's really good. It's really, really good. He did an excellent, excellent job on it. So I have nothing but the highest praise for that. So after the live stream, I would encourage everyone to go watch Inspiring Philosophy's video on the Exodus. And we'll get more into that because many of the questions tonight are going to be, in many respects, probably shaped by that video from earlier today. So we're going to get into the questions pretty fast here. I'm not going to say so long and thanks for all the fish. At least not at the beginning. But anyway, if you have, the rules are the same as always. We start with super chats have priority. They always do. If you want to ask a question but not do a super chat, I ask that you put a Q and a colon at the front of the comment, so I know it's a question directed to me and not just another comment to someone in the live stream, in the live chat. I also ask that you only ask the question once, so I know whether or not I've actually looked at it or answered it. I'm not going to promise that every question gets answered, because, we'd be here for 8 hours. And, I have a pretty strong endurance to answer questions, but not quite that long. So, human physical limitations aside, we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can. Finally, if you're going to ask me a question about something in, say, a Bible verse or a foreign word, I ask that you give me some context. Either give me the passage so I can look it up, or what you think the word means, so I have something to go on. So I'm not even, because sometimes somebody will say, oh, well, what does this word mean? Well, which language is it? It really, really helps just to even have that information. So, anyway, with that said, let's start getting into the questions, and we are actually going to start off with a couple of non-super chats. So I'm going to make sure that's off. Connect here. Okay. The first non-super chat here comes from the Camel Leopard. What do you make of the three strangers that visited Abraham? Are they Trinitarian implications here, or are they simply angelic beings? All right. Now, we're told that Abraham is visited by an angel of the Lord, and that there are three strangers. We're not exactly sure of the identities of all of these. One is definitely identified as angel of the Lord. The other two, we don't know. Are they persons of the Trinity? Are they angels of some kind that are manifesting a bodily form? We just don't know. The text doesn't give us enough information here. I wish it was a little more clear, but we don't know. Honestly, we have to admit when the text doesn't give us enough info. And this is one of those places where it just doesn't give us enough info. Other than that, one of them at least is a theophany. One of the strangers is at least a theophany. So that's about all we know on this regard. So unfortunately, there's not much more I can give you there on this one. We have to admit our ignorance and not try to guess any more than what we already have. So, but it is a good question. Wish I knew more. All right, the second non-super chat is from The Sirvian. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Question. How would you contrast Mormon polytheism from ancient Near Eastern polytheism? Okay. Um, they're different in actually quite radical ways. Um, the Mormon conception of God is actually not a polytheism, it's a henotheism. It's essentially the belief that there are many gods, but you owe your allegiance only to one, which is Adam God in the Mormon pantheon. Now, the way Mormon theology works is it's ancient Near Eastern polytheism would sort of state that the gods of in the polytheistic system were not just gods of, say, this world, but they could also be gods of, say, stars and planets, and they had great wide sweeping powers. You know, Amun-Re was king of all gods in Egypt. You know, not just, say, the god of the water, the god of Osiris or whatever. You know, he was the top dog of all gods. In Mormon henotheism, Adam God is not the god of the universe. He's not. He's the god of this world, and only this world, this planet Earth. There are other gods that he came from, and it's the idea in Mormon theology that humans who are follow the teachings of the Mormon Church become themselves gods and rule over a planet themselves. So it's kind of they're sort of spreading out their divine representatives across the universe. So in many respects, it's sort of a multi-level theological system where the next highest god, you have to go the rank up, but you're not responsible for the rank up. So the god that, say, Adam God would have worshipped in Mormon theology, Adam God would have worshipped and observed as God, but you're not responsible. You're responsible for your level. So you're responsible, Adam God, but you're not responsible to the God above him. So it's very different from ancient polytheism. It's very different from ancient polytheism. It's almost not even comparable. It's a whole sort of different metaphysics that's going on here. And the whole idea that souls are the generation of the procreation of souls between Adam God and Eve Goddess, because that does exist in Mormon theology, end up being the souls of human beings, which are then more or less they're infant gods that are waiting for their ultimate apotheosis. So it's a very different system. It's a very different metaphysics, and it's based on completely different ideas. So apart from there being many gods ontologically, there's really very little basis of comparison between, say, Mormon henotheism and ancient Near Eastern polytheism. So anyway, it's a great question. It's one of those questions of comparative religion. So it's not really so much even a archaeological issue or a mythological issue. It's a comparative religion question. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a great question. Okay. And we are going to, let's see here. We'll go for the super chats and then come back to the non-super chats, because the non-super chats are very interesting too. Okay. Our first super chat is from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Could the generation Genea Jesus was speaking of in Matthew 24 be speaking of any time? If not, does it mean his second coming was intended to be soon? All right. Now what we're going to do is we are going to also, he actually reprises that question and basically talks about the same question in his third super chat, which I thank you very much for this super chat as well. Hi, Dr. Falk. You mentioned that prophecy is meant to be recontextualized. Could this have effect on Matthew 24:34? Sorry, I took interest in this verse. Okay, we're going to talk about this passage. Obviously, it's got you very interested. It is an interesting passage, a fascinating passage. So let's bring up the Bible here. Now, to actually discuss this one, we need to go almost to the beginning of the passage, because that's where the context of this starts. So we're not going to read the whole thing. We'll skip through it for the sake of time. But it will. The context here, the beginning of the passage will give us enough of the context to figure out what is going on here. Okay, I'll start at verse 1 of Matthew 24. And Jesus came out from the temple, and he was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he answered them and said to them, Do you not see these things? Truly, I say to you, not one stone here shall be left upon another, which will not be torn down. And as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus answered and said to them, See to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will mislead many. And you will be hearing of wars, rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. Scroll up a bit here. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and in various places, and there will be famines and earthquakes. But these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. Then they will deliver you to tribulation, and will kill you, and will be hated by all nations on account of my name. Okay? And it goes on about some of these things that must come to pass first. And then we get to verse 34, which is sort of your. And we will take it from, let's see here. Well, that's probably enough context. Okay, verse 34 says, Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words shall not pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not in the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Okay. The core of your question seems to revolve around the word generation, Genea. Now, the thing with Genea is, like almost all words in the Bible, it has a semantic range. And it can mean race, generation, kind. You know, you can even stretch this to ilk, to be very honest. And when he said this, you know, it's very true that many of the early believers of Jesus Christ thought that he was talking about, the generation, the living generation of his day. And there's a possibility that could have been one of the meanings. But it is not restricted to that. When you look at the whole passage in its context, you know, for example, you know, take the whole war and rumor of war question here, which is in verses 6 to 8. You know, where it says there's wars and rumors of wars. Those things must take place, but these are not the end. But what Christ is saying here is these are not signs of the end times. That's not it. You know, when the people of the prince who is to come comes and smashes down the temple, that's not the end. Okay? You know, so he's telling the disciples here that, hey, you know, things that might seem really, really bad, you know, everything that might seem to be going to heck in a handbasket, It's not the signs of the end times. It's really not. And Christ is basically telling his disciples that, hey, there's going to be some bad times yet. You're going to be delivered up from persecution. There'll be wars. There'll be famines. There'll be pestilences. This is just going to happen. So Christ is being very, very specific here when he's telling them that none of this stuff is going to be a sign of the end times. And frankly, not even the Jewish people are going to go away. Those who mocked, those who believed, the same sort of attitudes that were in his day are going to still be there at the time of his coming. And that's what it's going to. This is what this means here by Ganea, is it's that it's not the physical generation, that 25 years. It's that attitude and ethos. That's what's going to persist until the last days. So when we take this into its context of what Christ is trying to tell the disciples, it does become very, very clear what he means here. But you can't take these verses out of their context. Because if you do take them out of context, you do get some pretty out there sort of interpretations like you find in Hal Lindsey or the Left Behind crew. So that's what's going on in this verse. Rather lengthy explanation, but I hope that explains it for you. Anyway, thank you very much for both those super chats. I tried to kill two birds with one stone here, and I hope I was effective in doing it. But I do appreciate both super chats. Now I'm going to take the middle one, which is, again, by Brick Creation for $5. Thank you again. Are you familiar with the authors some scholars attribute to Genesis, Priestley, Elohist, Yahwist, Deuteronomist? Any agree? I think you mean arguments here against this. I'm just not a big fan of the documentary hypothesis. I think it does real violence to the literary structure of the text. I think that Genesis was written in a very, very specific way to communicate things. And I think the whole Torah has a structure to it that, trying to figure out which of these, say, fictitious sources, for lack of a better word, wrote every little scrap and portion of it. It doesn't make any sense to me as a body of literature. It would be like taking Lord Alfred Tennyson and dissecting him by saying, well, there's multiple authors to Tennyson, so let's just rip this thing apart. Or it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Contradiction, two authors. Okay? No, it's just silly. It's just silly. So I mean, I'm, and frankly too, we do find Bronze Age literature that has all the literary features that we find in the Pentateuch. If those features are there in late Bronze literature, why do we have to ascribe those features to multiple authorship? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I should probably do another extended video just on this subject, but I'm also aware that right now Michael Jones is of Inspiring Philosophy is working on something to this end as well. So I don't want to duplicate any effort here. But we'll see what he does, and maybe if, I might do a rejoinder to it as well. But we'll see what happens. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's a good question. Okay, let's get Twitch up here. And we got a super chat from Cataphracт3 for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on ghosts in the Old Testament and today? Okay. There is The Bible, the Old Testament, does seem to believe in the reality of ghosts. At least insofar as a spirit of the deceased could return. It also forbids the practice of contacting the dead. As far as, we also see that this is a common belief in the New Testament. You know, when Christ returns and walks into the room with his disciples, you know, they're afraid he's a ghost. You know, they're afraid he's a ghost. And, you know, Christ says to his disciples, you know, handle me and see, you know, put your fingers in the wounds and in my side and handle me and see. For a spirit does not have flesh and bone as you see me have. So this is a belief that is both present in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Now we also understand from the Old Testament that, especially the Witch of Endor scene, where the text says that the medium was afraid. She was afraid because the soul of Samuel appeared, whereas she was expecting a familiar spirit. Essentially, in this particular case, God allowed the return of the soul of the prophet Samuel to pronounce judgment. But what we get out of this, too, is something very interesting. Now, you have to understand that the text in the Witch of Endor pericope does absolutely affirm that it was Samuel's spirit that had returned. This is something that the text affirms strongly. So it's not an apparition of Samuel or an imposter of Samuel. This is Samuel. But the text also indicates that the familiar spirit has been masquerading as other people as well. My view on, say, a lot of ghostly apparitions as such is a lot of them are, say, malevolent spirits that are masquerading and causing mischief. And I think we see when I look at, say, accounts of ghostly apparitions as they exist today, you do see the same patterns over and over and over again. And as I said, I've heard some pretty crazy stories when I was at seminary about people having encounters, and very, very much it's the same thing over and over and over again, where it's not the real deceased. It's someone sort of a ghost, having his jollies, a foul spirit having his jollies and impersonating somebody, and that does seem to, they don't mind getting a rise out of people by doing that. Now, none of this excludes the possibility of hallucinations, of there's other explanations for ghosts as well. But with that said, however, the ones that I have heard where you can sort of rule out those alternate explanations, like he was smoking pot, or he was drunk off his gourd, or he had a bad burrito that day. The pattern does seem to be very repetitive. In some cases, it does happen a lot more with younger people, where they do see these apparitions than it's with elder people. But it does happen to older people too. So I think that's sort of my view today, that that in a lot of cases, what we see as encounter as ghostly apparitions can either be explained away by either naturalistic phenomena or by malevolent spirits impersonating the dead. Because we know, for example, the wicked who are dead are confined in prison. They're held in a basically a jail cell in Hades, waiting for their judgment. So they're not coming back to create problems. As far as those who are dead in Christ, they're up with the Lord. To be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. So unless there's some very special circumstances, and I'm not denying that there can be special circumstances where the dead are allowed to return in certain cases. That's under the prerogative of God, and he can do whatever he wants. And there's nothing in the Bible that prevents God from sending back a spirit of a human being to make a manifestation. But it's also very abnormal. It doesn't happen that often. It's exceptionally abnormal. It's exceptionally abnormal. Yeah, there's also that my wife points out that the two humans that God wants to come back, which is Enoch and Elijah, he took them alive. They're not dead. You know, they were brought into heaven physically, and they will probably return physically. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. It's a good question too. Okay. Benjamin Rausch for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Amenhotep I was recently X-rayed and found buried with 30 amulets. How did ancient Egypt use Totem Passe and similar amulets for the dead? Okay. Basically, when a mummy is wrapped, it's wrapped with a variety of amulets, and sometimes they are just sort of, you know, there. You look at these amulets, and I wish I had a picture handy of these. You'll see that they're not very big. Most of the amulets are about an inch big. On a king like Amenhotep I, they might be larger. Like they might be like a heart scarab. The various amulets found on a mummy, especially a royal mummy like Amenhotep I, were used to often protect specific parts of the body. So they would be wrapped in place near the organ or the tissues that they were said to protect. Like, for example, the heart scarab was usually placed right over the breastbone. You know, so and it was there to protect the heart. Sometimes they were just wrapped in amongst the linens. Okay, like for example, I got to see a collection of small burial amulets that was housed in the Royal Ontario Museum, and most of them are not very big. Most of them are about, say, an inch tall, and they have a loop for a string. So basically, what they would do is oftentimes, what they would do is they would have a cord that they would tie around the particular section of that they were wrapping. Like, for example, they might wrap a cord around, say, the bicep with an amulet attached. They would also, hang them around the neck. You know, there's various places they could hold them in place using cords and string, and then just wrap the body in place. So there's several ways that it could actually have been used and applied to the dead. Now, we also know that sometimes too, amulets were just sort of thrown in with the body. You know, we find this, for example, in the Anubis shrine of King Tut, where that had been used for holding the canopic jars on procession. And it was, once they got to the tomb, the canopic jars were taken out of the Anubis shrine and placed into the canopic chest. But one of the things that was found in the Anubis shrine by Howard Carter was a bunch of loose amulets. And some wreaths of flowers. So what we gather from that is that they would sometimes just take a handful of amulets and throw them in. So they did both. They had this formal process of wrapping the mummy with amulets under the linens, but they also had loose amulets too. You know, just like throw a set of dragon dice in there. You know. Except it would be little amulets of Anubis and Amun-Re and Khnum and Hathor and Osiris. Okay, so So that's how they kind of did that application of amulets in the burial and mummification process. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, the camel leopard for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. I'm currently studying Job and have found conflicting commentaries on the identity of the Satan in the book. Is he meant to be the devil or another being? Shamuel, loved the documentary, by the way. Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun to be involved. Okay. The idea that Satan in the Book of Job is really a job description. It's really a job description. Now, Hasatan means the accuser. So basically, he's God's prosecutor on at least in the Divine Council in the Book of Job. Now, here's one of those places where I agree with, say, Michael Heiser on, say, the role of Satan and, say, the role of the Divine Council in the Book of Job. And a lot of this comes out of the fact that I think that Job is much later than a lot of traditional commentators suggest. I do think it's definitely Iron Age, and my guess is it's probably even Iron Age 2. So I think it's a much later book than we find in a lot of the Old Testament. And there is nothing necessitating that Job be an old book. So I think, say, even Second Temple literature might have even played a profound influence on the Book of Job. So here's someplace where I do definitely agree with Michael Heiser that, the role of Satan in this is more of a prosecutorial role than it is necessarily the devil. Now, the devil is also called a Hasatan too. And this is where things sort of get confusing. We can't actually be sure if the Hasatan of Job is the same as what it later is connoted to be. Later on, we do see that that Satan is definitely sort of identified as being a kind of accuser. The accuser of the brethren. So, later on, it definitely has that connotation. Definitely in the New Testament. In the Book of Job, it's questionable. We're not sure. So, again, the limitations here of the text don't give us enough specificity. We do know that the accuser here is maybe stretching his authority, his prosecutorial authority, a bit too far. An unethical prosecutor. So we do get that sort of image in the Book of Job, where he's basically going beyond his mandate, whatever mandate Hasatan and Job had, to falsely accuse Job of being perfidious, faithless. Strike down his flesh, he'll curse you immediately. Job didn't. Job didn't understand, but Job also was a upright man. Not only did he sacrifice for his transgressions, but for the transgressions of his children. I did skip 2. I'll have to see here. All right, I've been told I have just skipped 2 super chats. Okay. I did Benjamin Rush. Well, is it a second one? Yeah, I did the Amulus one already. This was right above it. And it did not come through. Yeah, I see it. I see it up there, but it didn't come into Twidget. I'll have to restart Twidget. Try to get it in there, but... Right. Maybe it'll feed in this time. Yeah, that happens on our software. Freeware. Sometimes it just doesn't. There's... Okay, it's in there now. Okay. Okay, so let's get back to finishing this, and then we'll get to hers. Okay. To sort of wrap up here, we don't know if the Hasatan of the Book of Job is the devil of later times, but I think there's some warrant here for saying he is, just because he does seem to be a unjust prosecutor. So, yeah, I would definitely say that that there's warrant for it, although it's not necessarily the case. So, that's the best I can answer that question, because again, we got a little bit of vagary here, and that leaves some wiggle room. But I do agree with, say, Heiser here that Hasatan is a job description. It's not a name here. It's a job description, and it means the accuser. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Now that we've settled that technical difficulty. Oh. Yeah, absolutely. If you've done a super chat and we didn't get to it, let us know. Kiara is always monitoring the live stream to see if that happens. And sometimes we do miss it because of the freeware, but we make it a point to answer and highlight every super chat, because we do very, very much value these. Okay, so this super chat is from Saahi Hethert Newt for $2. Thank you very much for super chat. So good to see you tonight. I'm glad you joined us. It's always great to have you on the live streams. I love having you there. Glad you liked the meme I tweeted at you. Yes, I did. Oh, I'd have to look it up again, but I did enjoy it. I love memes on ancient Egypt. It's just really fun. Now I'd have to sort of look it up which one it was again, but let's see here. Yes. I don't think. Yeah, she did the answer of what is the answer to life, universe, and everything, and then she has a little bit some comedic art there too. So so yes, I did enjoy it very much. So okay, get me back on my page. All right. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I apologize that our software missed it, but I hope we made it right. So it was good to see you tonight. It's great to have you here. Okay. Okay, Angel VWM for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is the difference between a clan and a tribe of ancient Israelite culture? Now, it's a great question. We can actually expand this to basically ancient Near Eastern culture, because it's the difference between a clan and a tribe is not specific to Israelite culture. We also find it in Bedouin culture, and other ancient Near Eastern cultures too. So it's not just restricted to this. Now, simply put, a clan is a family unit of 4 generations. That's simply put. It's a family unit of 4 generations. Okay. A tribe is a collection of related clans. Okay. Every clan had a clan leader. Every tribe had a tribe leader. And the tribe, the way clan politics works in the ancient Near East is all the power rests with the clans, and the tribe leader had usually very little power. The tribal leader is more or less a figurehead position, except when there are, say, times of crisis, and where, say, one person has to speak for all the clans. A tribal leader may be appointed to speak on behalf of all the clans. So that's sort of the rough difference here, is that you had a common descendancy for all the clans within a tribe, but a clan itself is 4 generations. And from that, new clans can spin off, old clans can die off. Clans were seen as sort of semi-ephemeral in that they didn't last forever. There was a limited time that clans survived. But a tribe could last for virtually forever. As long as there was new clans to replenish the tribe, the existence of a tribal identity was forever. However, the clans, that's really where sort of the power was within the clans. And we still see this in places like, say, Afghanistan. In Afghanistan today, and in Libya today, clan politics still plays a huge role. You know, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya was put in power by the clans. And then he was deposed by the clans. So, you know, they can make or break a government. You know, and that was true back then, and it's still true today. In fact, you could even say, in many respects, that the tribal affiliation is much less important. Much less important. In fact, it's so much in many respects doesn't matter that, you know, Solomon tried to abolish the tribal affiliations by moving clans around. So he changed borders of tribal inheritances just so he could break down that tribal structure to make it easier to govern the clans. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Simply put, clans 4 generations is a family group of 4 generations. And a tribe is a collection of clans. That's as simple as it gets. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Vic M for $20 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, if you could briefly talk about your archaeological experiences and how much did it typically cost to excavate at sites where you were at. Eric Klein said it costs about $20K USD per day for excavating at Tel Kabri. All right. Now, it is going to be very, very different to excavate in, say, Israel than it is in Egypt. There's several differences. The difference, I mean, first of all, to be honest, I did most of my archaeological work inside of museums. Okay, I'm not a field digger. I'm not a field archaeologist. I'm more of a historian. So I got to work with some artifacts, cataloging, doing reports. So, you know, that's sort of my archaeological experiences. The fact is too that when you look at, say, the difference between, say, archaeology in Israel and in Egypt, doing archaeology in Israel is very, very expensive to do. Very expensive to do. And people who come and dig basically are self-funding the dig. Most digs in Israel get their funding from the diggers who pay the dig like $4,000 to $8,000 for 2 weeks of digging, and they're not providing room and board. There's no food, no hotel. You know, you have to find that on your own if you dig in Israel. So it's very, very expensive if you want to dig in Israel. It's extremely expensive. Now, on the other hand, Egypt is very cheap. And that's because they have certain laws in place. In Egypt, if you come to Egypt and work on a dig, they can't charge you money for that. The dig has to pay for you to dig there. And by that, it means it has to pay your room and board, your food, and it has to cover your expenses. It doesn't have to pay you a stipend, but it has to cover all your expenses except for the flight. The reason why is because they want to make, the Egyptian government wants to make it attractive for a dig to hire the local worker instead of bringing in foreigners to dig. So it's a very, very different cost experience. Now, with that said, it's also much more difficult to get a license in Egypt to dig than it is in, say, Israel. In Israel, if you've got the money and you've got a few, say, low-level connections, you can easily get a license to dig. Again, it comes down to money in Israel. In Egypt, you have to put in a license for you have to put an application for a concession, which they may or may not grant. And the whole process of getting a license for concession is quite arduous. It's quite arduous. It typically requires an application put in a year in advance, so you have to commit to a year in advance to go. All the names of all the participants, all the foreign participants, have to be on that application. So you can't add somebody later. In Israel, you can basically up to the last minute have people come onto the dig if they're willing to pay the price. You can't do that in Egypt. So there's a lot of logistical differences between digging in Egypt and digging in Israel. So Klein is right. It's expensive to dig, and it's very expensive in Israel. Israel's not a cheap country. Things cost money, and it's very expensive. You do have to pay authorities and licensing fees, and yeah, I can believe it costs about $20K a day to excavate in Israel. That doesn't surprise me. It's a lot less in Egypt. It's a lot less. You can probably fund a dig in Egypt for a few hundred a day, because frankly, beans and rice aren't that expensive. So you don't get good food there, but they do have to feed you. A lot of fool. You eat a lot of fool and bread. And fool is a sort of a mushy bean paste that you eat with bread. You tend to eat that a lot when you're on a dig in Egypt. So that I hope that gives you some insight. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that answered your question. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Kevin Vaughn for $4.99. Thank you very much, and it's good to see you tonight, friend. Hi, Dr. Falk. How should we understand Moses permitted you in Matthew 19:8 when Deuteronomy has Moses delivering God's commands? Does he work in his own too? Okay, let's just read that. So it's Matthew 19, verse 8. Okay, and it says, we'll start at verse 7 just for context. They said to him, "Why then did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and send her away?" He said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it has not been this way." Okay. The question here turns upon the word permit. And the word here is epitrepo, and it's basically to entrust, to permit, to allow. Now, the fact is, the commands were delivered. Moses was delivering. You rightly observe that Moses is delivering God's commands. However, this is not a command to divorce. Okay? This is why Christ's words here are very, very particular. One of the things is that they're kind of saying that why then did Moses command to give her a certificate and send her away? Well, he didn't command you to do that. He's permitting you to do that. So there's a context, there's a nuance here that's being spoken. Why did if God doesn't like divorce, why did he command it? Well, he didn't. He allowed it. And Moses here is being used as sort of the archetype of the lawgiver. Okay. So it's not that the command directly comes from Moses, but that it is that Moses is the one who is the institutor of God's command. But that command is a permissive command. It's not a thou shalt command. It's not an absolute command. So that's sort of what's going on in this text here. So we have to understand that Moses is being sort of viewed as sort of the archetype of the law. He's sort of the figurehead of the law. But the law's not coming from Moses per se. At the same time, too, there's that sort of undercurrent of this text that, oh well, if a spouse commits adultery, you must divorce her. That's not saying that. Or because frankly back then, a lot of the rabbis saw that any excuse was permission to give a spouse you didn't like a certificate of a divorce and send her off. And Christ is really sort of limiting that here. And he goes on right in the next verse to say, he said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning this was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Okay, so he's raising the bar on this. He's actually going, in many respects, he's taking the bar and elevating it above what Moses permitted. So that's this would fall in theology. We would call this being part of God's permissive will, but not his absolute will. He doesn't want divorce, but he's permitting it because of the hardness of your hearts. So I hope that clarifies the passage and what's going on here. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. There was a very good book done on divorce. I can't remember. Cellar House. Cellar House was the name of the author, and it was on Martin Bucer's a view of marriage and divorce. Yeah, it was a very good book. Hard to get, expensive, very expensive book. But yeah, it was on Martin Bucer, who was a reformer. It was a second generation reformer that almost no one's heard of. But he wrote extensively on the whole matter of marriage and divorce. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Cataphract 3 for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is the Bible inherently dualistic in nature? I'm thinking what you mean by dualistic is that two realms. The idea that there's a material and a spiritual realm. And as opposed to, say, theological dualism where there's a good God and a bad God. I think that's what you mean here. because there's two ways to take dualism. There's as I said, yeah. If this is not what you mean, write a comment and clarify this, okay? Because there's two ways to take dualism here. As I said, theological or say spiritual material dualism. So I'm gonna assume it is the spiritual material dualism that you're talking about here, not the theological dualism. Yes, absolutely. I think that the Bible is inherently has a idea of a spiritual and a material realm. I think that's very clear from the texts. There does seem to be the affirmation of an afterlife, of a world to come, that there are spirits of various kinds, that the soul lives on, that there are differences in identity. Identity plays a large role in sort of this sort of undergirding of the biblical texts. Like, for example, when your body dies, you're not dead because your spirit lives on. Okay? So the identity of the person doesn't die with the body. The identity of the person survives with the spirit. So, we see this, for example, at the Transfiguration, where the spirit of Moses appears, as Christ is transfigured. We see this at, when Christ talks to the Sadducees, where he points out to them, the text says, I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. I am the God, he is the God of the living, not the dead. We do see this at the episode of the Witch of Endor, where the soul of Samuel comes back from the grave. We see this in, say, the discussions of when Bathsheba and David lose their child. David says, my son cannot return to me, but I will go to him. So there is an idea in all through the scriptures that there's a material realm and a spiritual realm. So yes, I absolutely think in that respect, the Bible is inherently dualistic, as far as its substance, its metaphysics of substance. To add upon that, however, this does not discount the importance of the material. They're both aspects of the natural world as such. So, get your exercise, eat a good diet, take care of that body, because that's part of this substance of the natural world that God has put into our stewardship. Okay, so we are natural. Human beings are naturally have one foot in both worlds. It's part of our nature to have one foot in the spiritual and one foot in the material. So we are dualistic beings, and I think the Bible is inherently dualistic in its approach to what we would call anthropology, theological anthropology. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. The Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. When Messiah returns, what is something you would ask him? Oh boy. Wow. Which pharaoh did Abraham actually talk to? Because I have no way of figuring out which king of Egypt that Abraham talked to. I'd love to know which one. It was one of 20 kings in Dynasty 13. It was just that's going to be. I mean, that's sort of one of my burning questions: is which one was that Abraham actually talked to? So, that one just pops off the top of my head. But oh, there's so much I'd love to ask. So much I'd love to ask. Wow. There's just wow. If you have the opportunity to ask Messiah anything when he returns, it would be just that. You got so much time here to really go into depth on things that we just are at a loss to know today. How tall really was the Tower of Babel? Was it a global flood or was it a local flood? Don't know. So, there's a lot of questions I'd love to know the answer to that I just simply don't know off the top of my head. And, I would just really, really enjoy. And there is something here that I think is really, really important that we don't want to overlook either. That the most valuable thing that, Christ talks about, store up your treasures in heaven where moth and rust won't destroy. The most valuable commodity in heaven is FaceTime with the Messiah. FaceTime with the King. It's going to be a limited resource. And some people will have more access than others. That is the ultimate treasure of heaven. FaceTime with the Master. So, absolutely, I would love to be able to have that little bit of time slice with the Master to actually talk to him. So that's what I'm doing this for. This is the big reward. Silver and gold is worthless. Precious stones come and go. None of that stuff is worth the pile of dirt it came from. But FaceTime with the Master, that endures. That's forever. So, I even think about it in my own life. I have been very, very lucky. I did my theological training with some of the biggest names in theology today, biggest names in archaeology. I've had friends that I never thought I would even get to know. Like I was friends with J.I. Packer. And I treasure every one of those moments. Where I got to, sit at the feet of giants. I was a graduate student, the research assistant to Kenneth Kitchen for 3 years, and I valued every one of those experiences. I'll treasure them always. So, I think about, what would it be like to have FaceTime with a Master, and it's just would blow all that away. This would be just a phenomenal experience. So anyway, it's a good question. It actually has some very serious implications. So I want to thank you for that super chat and that really thought-provoking question. Okay, Benjamin Rush for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is it true that there was ancient state-sanctioned looting of tombs in order to fill government coffers when the state was desperate for funds? That's a yes and a no. It was not state-sanctioned by the Egyptians. Okay? But there was state-sanctioned looting from, say, foreign invaders. The Hyksos looted Egyptian tombs, and it seems to be something that was sanctioned by the state. And they would do it for the gold, the silver, the precious metals, the stones, and basically so they could resell it in the Mediterranean trade, because the Hyksos had boats that they would send out across the Mediterranean to trade goods for. So, in that particular case, in the case of the Hyksos, it was state-sanctioned looting. However, say you get to Dynasty 20, the state came down hard on looters. It came down really hard. In fact, they had police investigations over it. So it really depended on who was the government. If it was the Assyrians, if it was the Persians, if it was the Hyksos, oh yeah, the government would sanction looting because they didn't care if they just dug up some Egyptian's tomb. If it was a native Egyptian dynasty, then yeah, that was off limits. Now, looting still went on. We see evidence of looting going as far back as at least Dynasty 2. So almost immediately with the culture of the mortuary culture of Egypt, looting came along almost right beside it, and it's been like that ever since the beginning of, say, the Egyptian kingdom. Is that, looting was almost part and parcel to building these exotic tombs. So it wasn't a matter of it filling state coffers, but it was a matter of, in many cases, just, filling people's pockets, greed. And we noticed one of the interesting things about looting that we do notice is that many of the looters were actually those people who built the tombs. Because one of the interesting things we find in some of the tombs, especially in King's Valleys, is there'll be looters' tunnels. For example, and there's a great example at Abydos, the tomb of Senwosret III at Abydos. There's not just the tunnel, the tomb of Senwosret III, but there's actually a looter's tunnel that goes right into the burial chamber of Senwosret III. Well, who's got the industry to actually build a tunnel of that kind? Well, tomb builders. So the very same people who are building these tombs are also looting them. So, and a lot of it is because they also had the capacity to break this stuff down, melt it down, and sell it. Essentially, once they had, say, for example, if they just ripped off a metal hinge somewhere off of a door, they'd melt that thing down, pound it into an ingot, and then just trade it for something else. So, Egypt being a barter economy, currency of this kind was almost invisible once it sort of hit the looters' hands. So you can, in many respects, you could consider it almost like the cryptocurrency of their day, because it was all barter economy. There was no say currency, no money. People traded goods. So state-sanctioned looting was very limited. It was basically limited to foreign dynasties. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and Jack Ray just gave us $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. I don't see a question from you, but I still very, very much appreciate the support. Every super chat helps us to carry on this work. For us, this is the highlight of our week. We love doing these live stream Q&As, and it really gives us great encouragement when people help us to do and carry on the work, and it just thrills us when we get these donations. So very, very much appreciated, and thank you very much. Did we cover that earlier? Okay. Anthony Rugier for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Do you find claims of Zoroastrian influence on Israelite religion specious? I know there are serious questions about when Zoroastrianism coalesced. Yes, there is. Um, uh, Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. It's an interesting and thought-provoking question. Now, we do find that the history of Zoroastrianism is a bit foggy. And I don't want to go too far on my comments on Zoroastrianism because I'm not an expert on Zoroastrianism. There is some, especially in the later prophets, some allusion to Zoroastrianism. But we don't find it in the earlier texts. Like, for example, it's not in the Torah. There does not seem to be any serious influence between Zoroastrianism and, say Torah. We do find it in, say, allusions to it in, say, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So there does seem to be some allusion to that in, say, the later works, in the exilic works. Exilic works is really where we find any influence by Zoroastrianism. But that's about the only place where we do find it. And those books, you know, are much later. They're like 4th and 5th century BC. So that's about really all where we find Zoroastrianism, and it does seem to be very sort of tangential. Most of it dates dates the Persian period, honestly. So I do find that the claims here are usually over exaggerated, because Zoroastrianism as a religion isn't quite that old. It doesn't go back to the Late Bronze Age. It's definitely a Persian phenomena, and doesn't seem to predate. If it predates the Persian period, it isn't by very much. So maybe late Assyrian, but definitely or late Assyrian, Babylonian, but definitely Persian. That's where you see Zoroastrianism sort of come to its own. So given that, I can't take those sort of comments too seriously that say the Bible is influenced by it, because even though there is influences, I grant there's influences, it's not. It's really restricted. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. Okay. Tony G for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Good evening, Dr. Falk. Why were the Israelite kings permitted to have multiple wives and concubines? Why was that not considered adultery? Well, yeah, now this one is really, this is one of those yes and no things, okay? You have two questions here. One question is, why was the Israelite kings permitted to have multiple wives and concubines? Short answer is they weren't. Okay? They weren't. The second of all, why was that not considered adultery? Because of permissive law. Okay? Now, let me deconstruct that. Multiple wives in the Old Testament was not forbidden, it was permitted. It was never considered to be the ideal. Okay? So, with that said, your average person, you know, if he could afford it, a man could have more than one wife. That was allowed. On the other hand, the only person in Torah that's not allowed to have multiple wives is the king. Let's see if I can find that passage. See if I can. Okay, I can't seem to find this at the moment. Let's see here. There is a passage, and I can't remember it off the top of my head where it is exactly. But it says, when you come to appoint for yourself a king to rule over you, he is not to accumulate for himself horses, gold, and many wives. Okay? So in many respects, the king was not permitted to... he was also supposed to abstain from alcohol, too. He was also supposed to abstain from wine. That never happened. But the king, in many respects, is the only... Let's see if I can see this. Yeah, I just can't seem to find it at the moment. But there is a passage, and is it Deuteronomy 17:16? Is that it? That might be it. Yes, this is it. Thank you very much, MFN. Thank you for the assist. All right, this is the passage. You shall... see, let's go back to 14 here. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me. You shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your countrymen you shall set as king over yourselves. You shall not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself. Don't accumulate horses. He shall not cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again return that way. Neither shall he multiply wives for himself. No many wives if you're king, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver or gold for himself. No money. Okay. In fact, it even says, now it shall come about when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of the law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. So under supervision. So he's supposed to know this. So in many respects, he's not an adulterer, but he's also not permitted to do this. So that's what's sort of going on, is that, you know, multiple wives were permitted if you, but you weren't permitted if you were the king. You weren't supposed to have a lot of horses for yourself, not a lot of gold and silver for yourself, and not a lot of wives. Now, this does conflict with a very practical aspect of the ancient Near East, which is that kings traded wives. Basically traded daughters who become wives as treaty wives. So essentially, when a king signed a treaty with another nation, there was supposed to be an exchange of daughters to be wives of each other. So essentially, every king becomes related to every other king in a sense because of through intermarriage. This actually had a pretty... this made it very, very difficult for Israelite kings, especially ones that wanted to be, say, true to Torah, to sign treaties. And because if you were being true to Torah, you didn't accept treaty wives, which means you couldn't sign the treaties. So... In practical terms, the kings didn't follow this very well. They did accumulate many wives, just because of the practical matters involved with signing treaties in the ancient Near East. Now, interestingly enough, some kings didn't do this. The kings of Egypt didn't give out their daughters. They accepted treaty wives, but they didn't give them out. And they managed to do this for a very, very long time, at least until the time of Solomon. So, I hope that answers your question. It's an interesting question, and it really the ban on multiple wives becoming adultery really doesn't come into effect until the New Testament period. But in the Old Testament, yeah, it was allowed. It was allowed, just not for the king. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat and for the very thought-provoking questions. Okay. Okay, I see St. Luke here for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat, and apparently there is a question down below. Okay, I see it. Okay. Forgot to include my question in the super chat. Well, that's okay. It happens. We're good. Dr. Falk, what is your opinion on the location of Tel-El-Haman as the location of the biblical Sodom? I don't think that's Sodom, honestly. I think the evidence for Tel-El-Haman being Sodom is exceptionally poor. It's exceptionally poor. The Steve Collins dating of Tel-El-Haman, the destruction there, he dates to the mid 17th century BC, which is the time contemporary with the time of Joseph. And that's contemporary with the time of Joseph. So I don't see that happening. I think that's way off. Way off. I think it's in physically the wrong location. Because we know where the tar pits are. They're actually those fleeing Sodom, end up being stuck in. So we know that's sort of more south and east of the location of Tel-El-Haman. We have to understand that during the War of Kings, when sort of Sodom was in its height, the Elamite Confederacy, they're coming from Gaza and cutting across and approaching Sodom from the south, not the north, because they'd already been through the Levant. So that just strikes me as being the wrong location. Second of all, or maybe third, the Tel-El-Haman the destruction of Tel-Haman is actually, when we look at it, at the destruction there, it's no worse than we find at any other location, honestly. And Steve Ortiz, who excavated at Gezer, points this out, that the destruction layers on that are actually less pronounced than we find at, say, Megiddo. And that was, we know that Megiddo was destroyed by Tutmosis III, so, there's nothing sort of supernatural or extraordinary about the destruction at Tel-El-Haman. Also, I have serious concerns with how the stratigraphy is being read at Tel-El-Haman. I saw Steve Collins, discuss, the destruction layer, and then about 3 feet above it, he says, "Oh, this is the same destruction layer as that." That's not how stratigraphy works. Stratigraphy doesn't work with a destruction layer, then a mud fill, and then another destruction layer. It doesn't work that way. So I suspect that there's an issue here of not just wanting to read what you want into the text, but incompetency, or read into the site, but general incompetency as well. So I've got some real issues here with how that whole sort of excavation is being done. There's been no preliminary reports The site he's been excavating the same site for 10 years and not a single preliminary report. How? Sorry? What'd you say? Oh, okay. It's really important that excavators, if they want to be taken seriously, to do preliminary reports. The excavation site has basically told people who want to inspect the quality of the work, no. You pretty much have to agree with his findings before they share their work. Well, how do you know if you're going to agree with their findings if you can't inspect the work? This is not a professional excavation. This is archaeotourism. There's things also about the site that are just the way the site is being managed that are completely wacky. Like Collins allows excavators to come and take potsherds home with them. That's not allowed in Jordan. That's against the law. It's illegal to do that. So if they are not properly site managing their volunteers, how are they site managing the rest of it? So I've got some real problems with this. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. I don't think it's Sodom. I just don't think it's Sodom. There's too much here that's hinky and wrong. Both evidentiary and just in how the site's being conducted, that I think is just puts huge question marks over the whole thing. But anyway, I appreciate the super chat and I appreciate the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. The Camel Leopard for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is the mention of iron in Genesis 4:22 anachronistic? Well, let's pull up Genesis 4:22. Okay. Genesis 4. I think this is what, Tubal-Cain? Yeah. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Okay. Now, we have to kind of realize that what is being said here is he's a forger of metal implements. Now, there's two... When we talk about archaeometallurgy, we're not necessarily talking about smelting processes. We do have examples of very, very old iron implements, going way back to, say, the first dynasties of Egypt. But they're made out of meteoritic iron. And the way this was done was essentially you go out into some desert somewhere, you find meteorites, and you can forge those. And this has been recognized since going way back. It's really not until the beginning of the Iron Age that smelting processes for iron start to be done. And that's because of the invention of the touriere, which is essentially a blowpipe that was used in a smelting in a smelter to get the temperature high enough to produce a reduction environment that takes the iron oxides and essentially create metallic iron. So one can forge iron without necessarily having this technology for smelting, just by being able to find it naturally. And there are natural bronze deposits that are also, say, at the top of, say, copper ore deposits. This is better known as arsenic bronze. So it's not the tin bronze that we have of, say, later times, but it's a type of bronze, natural bronze, called arsenic bronze. And we do find natural arsenic bronze occur in some mineralogical deposits. So it's not necessarily anachronistic. If it was saying he was smelting it, then yeah, that would be anachronistic. But as simply forging it, no, not necessarily. Meteorites and natural arsenic bronze deposits can more than account for this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that, but I hope that answers the question. And then RG Strategy for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Follow-up question. Do you think Dynasty 22 and the other Libyan dynasties of the Third Intermediate Period did state-sponsored tomb looting, or you think it was Egyptianized enough that they wouldn't? I don't think they did. And the reason I don't think they did... I actually have two reasons why I don't think they did. At that particular time, the country was really split between the Libyan dynasties who ruled, say, the Delta, and the Theban priesthood that ruled, say, Upper Egypt. Your major burial grounds are in Upper Egypt. Basically, you know, Saqqara, Abydos, Thebes, all those are in Upper Egypt. So the Libyan dynasties didn't have the reach to loot those tombs, even if they'd wanted to. The Libyan priesthoods would never have put up with it. They would have never put up with that kind of looting. So I don't think the Libyan dynasties had the strength. I mean, they certainly didn't have the strength to unify the country. Okay? So they certainly would not have had the power and the influence to do state-sponsored looting in basically territory they didn't have an absolute control over. So I don't think it was that they were Egyptianized enough. I just don't think they had the ability to do it. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Again, it needed somebody, a sort of a state actor who was powerful enough to overcome the religious establishment of Egypt. And at that time, the Libyans just weren't that powerful enough. Now, the other thing is that when it also comes to the, say, the, what's it called now, the burials of Dynasty 22, most of them, it's clear that they didn't use recycled materials, because most of those burials were rich in silver, So it seems that the Libyans had a different source for silver and weren't using gold as much anymore. So they're not looting, say, the tombs of, say, the Theban kings for gold. Because we know, thanks to the tomb of King Tutankhamun, that most of the implements that the tombs of Dynasty 18 and 19 used were primarily of gold. Prior to the 21st dynasty, gold was much more in greater supply than silver. You hit Dynasty 21, silver becomes more plentiful than gold, but it still sort of carries that cachet of being the more valuable metal. So you see in the burials of Dynasty 21 and 22, silver-rich burials. So they're obviously not looting the tombs of Egyptian kings for that. They are, however, looting the Levant for silver, because silver at that time becomes exceptionally plentiful in the Levant at that time, thanks largely to mining operations. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Great question. Sentinel Apologetics for $2 Australian. Good to see you tonight, Rob. That guitar is the answer to the ultimate question. Well, it is the ultimate guitar. You have to have a good axe. I just wish I had even more time to play it. I'm too busy making videos, but I do very much think that is the ultimate question to the answer to the ultimate question too. Yeah. That guitar is sweet. I'll say that. It was good to see you tonight. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. And it looks like here we got one final super chat, and then we're going to go back and do some non-super chats. Marin Anguish for $5 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Nice to see you here tonight. Would you consider responding to a Christian guy's Exodus video? He favors Tutmosis IV as the pharaoh of the Exodus, unlike most early daters. No. Well, it depends. It depends who this. I mean, I've heard the Tutmosis IV. Theory before. Steve Collins favors that. I think he's wrong. I could, if I looked at it, I might take a look at it and see what he has to say. But yeah, I would consider responding. Look, most of our popcorn reviews come from viewer suggestions, by subscriber suggestions. So absolutely, we definitely would consider it. So I'd have to take a look at it and review it, and maybe we'll see, because frankly, there is a lot of garbage floating out there regarding the Exodus. Too much garbage. But thankfully, things are getting better. Things are getting a lot better. People are getting more rigorous about their data. They are taking the evidence more seriously now. So I don't only want to hammer Christians, but some of these things, they refuse to die. So I think you would have a lot of difficulty with Tutmosis IV as from an early data perspective, but we can see what he has. So anyway, absolutely, we will consider it. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Now we get to do some non-super chats. Someone the person asks, will we ever get to hear one of your compositions? I don't know. Maybe you already have and don't even know it. Could be. So let's see what else is out there. There was actually. Praise I Am. Yo, Dr. Falk. IP just released his long-awaited Exodus documentary. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Okay, my thoughts on the Exodus long-awaited Exodus Rediscovered documentary. I loved it. It was absolutely fantastic. Of course, I did help Michael with it, so I might be a little biased here. Just a little biased. But I'm admitting my bias. I was actually heavily involved in the project. And my name actually appears on the opening credits. So, it is Inspiring Philosophy Presents Project by Michael Jones and David Falk. So, yes, I was heavily involved with it. And on the 15th, we will be, Inspiring Philosophy is going to be having a Q&A session with him and me, and we're going to take some of the questions that came out of resulting from this. So, yes, absolutely, I'm hip deep on this one. Okay, and then Warrior of the Most High asks, in what way were you involved in IP's recent documentary on the Exodus? I haven't seen the whole thing yet. We'll definitely see the whole thing after the live stream tonight, because it's very good. Michael is just one of the most incredible documentary makers I've ever seen. He's just got an incredible talent for this. It's and when he gets that right, it's just a great synergy. He just does fabulous results when he and this. Now, the ways I was involved was essentially I was the sounding board. Essentially, I'd provide him with some evidence, and he would go research it and come back, and he'd ask, "Oh, is this any good?" And I'd say yes or no, and then he'd go do some more research, and I was more or less his sober second thought on a lot of this stuff. And I'd give him citations and references, and to be honest, I have to credit him too. He was not at all lazy about this. He did the heavy lift. He did the heavy lifting. He wrote the script. I edited the script. I provided a lot of suggestions, but my contribution was much more along the lines of, well, here's the data. Here's something you haven't considered. Here's something that's not quite right in the script, and he took everything I said seriously. So I have consulted on video projects where they completely ignored everything I said. So it's really refreshing to have to work with a partner who actually listens to you. So it was a great partnership. Very, very much enjoyed working with him. And he has really shown his integrity in this. That's a refreshing thing. He has a teachable spirit. He has a teachable spirit, and he's willing to follow the data wherever it leads. So you gotta love that. It's the ethos that I want people who listen to my channel to follow, which is to follow the data wherever it leads. Sometimes it doesn't lead you in places that you expect, but if you follow the data, you will almost always end up in the truth, in at least that ballpark of the truth. So I very much think that that ethos is exemplified by Michael Jones in his productions. So those are the ways I was involved. I basically edited scripts. I provide him with more evidence and citations, and yeah, it's a partnership, and it's turned out to be a really, really great partnership. Especially since we kind of got off to a rocky start with that first Exodus Rediscovered video. It's so nice to see that it's turned out for good. It's turned out for good. So thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Let's see. Deanne Salazar. Does God ever show a sense of humor in the Bible? Yes, he does. There is some pretty wacky stuff in the Bible. There is humor in the Bible. Not always in the way you expect. There's sarcasm, a lot of sarcasm in the Bible. You have the prophet Elijah with when he goes up against the prophets of Baal, and they're cutting themselves, they're slashing themselves. The prophets are trying to have their altar ignite, and they can't get it to ignite. Baal to ignite the altar, and he goes, "Well, where's your God? Is he on vacation? Is he on the toilet?" And I kid you not, that's what the text says. Yeah, that's meant to be really sarcastic and rude. The Apostle Thomas, the famous doubting Thomas, was some of the things he said was just like really sarcastic. I mean, it was just, when Lazarus dies, and Jesus hangs around for 3 days, and Jesus at this point is a wanted man. He's got a death warrant out on him, and Jesus goes, "Well, let's go back to Lazarus." And Thomas says the most incredible thing, which is, "Well, let's go back and die with Lazarus." I know if I was Jesus, I wouldn't have taken that from an apostle. That Thomas had a mouth on him. Total sarcasm coming out of that guy. But you know what? There was a sense of integrity too. He wanted to see it for himself. There was a time when it's appropriate. So, so absolutely yes. There is senses of humor in the Bible. Balaam and the donkey, can't push the donkey, so now the donkey starts talking. "Why are you beating me? Can't you see the angel there with a flaming sword that's going to kill you?" So there are definitely humorous aspects in the Bible. Definitely. Okay, let's see what else is next. Hmm. I'm going to take this one here from Charlie Don't Surf 344. You mentioned mythohistory in a previous video. I have heard that Genesis 1 to 11 can be considered mythohistory. What's the dividing line between that and history? Okay. Um, the dividing line between, say, history and mythohistory is that there are mythological aspects and archetypes that are incorporated in mythohistory that you don't find in just history. That in mythohistory, you have a core that's historical, but it's being told in a way that includes, say, mythological constructs as well. So that's sort of like, for example, we would call, say, the Trojan, the Iliad, is mythohistory. There was a real Trojan War. There was a real Greek invasion of Troy that was actually a Hittite city. Okay, but the Iliad also has aspects of, say, the divine. You have Greek gods intervening. You have fantastic deeds ascribed to the characters there in a way that sort of mythologizes them. So you have in the Iliad mythohistory. It's not pure history, but it's also not pure myth either. So that's sort of the dividing line, is that mythohistory is a bridge. It's a bridge concept. It's a bridge between pure myth and pure history. So that's sort of what it means in a nutshell. So in the case of, say, Genesis 1 to 11, what you have is a lot of temple constructs and temple rituals being sort of grafted onto the historical events. Like, for example, you have in the Garden in the creation narrative in the Garden of Eden, temple imagery all throughout there. It's all throughout there. During the flood scene, during the flood, Noah's Ark, sorry. You have the imagery of sacralizing converters, where chests are used to sanctify and purify, say, the people that and animals that come off the ark. This comes down to temple offerings and imagery, and it's a very, very strong motif in ancient Near Eastern temple practice. So this is why 1 to 11 is generally considered to be mythohistory, is because there are these religious elements that are included onto, say, an historical core. So anyway, it's a great question. Thank you very much for the question. Okay. Let's see, what else have we got? Nathan Yadone asks the question: has Pharaoh Shishak's tomb ever been found? If not, then maybe at Tanis. Okay. It has not been found. However, his canopic chest has been discovered. Unfortunately, it's an unprovenanced discovery, and currently his canopic chest is in the Berlin Museum, I believe. We don't know where exactly his tomb might have been. Tanis is a possibility. Bubastis is a possibility. So either one of those two locations could be possible. We do find some anonymous tombs at the Temple of Bubastis. So it is possible that Shoshank I, and that's who we mean by Shishak. Shoshank I, his tomb could be either in Bubastis or it could be in Tanis, but it hasn't been discovered yet. Other Shoshanks tombs have been discovered. So I think it's Shoshank II's tomb and Shoshank III has been discovered at Tanis, if I recall correctly, but don't take my word for that, because there's a lot of third intermediate tombs there. And I've been inside those tombs at Tanis. They're very interesting tombs. Very interesting tombs. They're actually, the way those tombs were constructed is very interesting. Because they're actually vaults. They're vaulted tombs. And the top of the vault was supposed to be the floor of the temple. So you go there, and when you look out over the tombs of the Tanite kings, um, you basically sort of see this irregular flooring that's on the top, and people actually walked on that. So people were walking over the tombs of the dead kings. But it was originally meant to be so it was like a raised vault. So they built this vault up, and cut it down. There's also some rock that they cut down into as well. So it's a combination of bedrock with stone slabs on top of it. So they sort of raised this vault up to create the temple floor. Fascinating tombs. They're very, very interesting. It's got some really cool imagery in it as well. So if you ever get the chance to go to Tanis and have a look at those tombs, great. They're wonderful. And the contents of those tombs are they should be now at the Gem. I saw the sarcophagi from the Tanite kings when I was at the Egyptian museum in Cairo, but it all should be moved to the Gem now. So we don't know where his tomb is. Could be a lot of places, but most likely in Tanis or in Bubastis. And they're still finding tombs at Tanis. Okay? You'd think they're done. They're not done. One of the things I was told when I was there was we couldn't take photographs of the tomb area. And the reason why we couldn't take photographs of the area where the tombs were, the top of the tombs, was because that's under current active excavation. And they had found something. I don't know what they had found, but they had found something and they wanted to keep it hush-hush. They didn't show us either. But they were very particular about that. No cameras on the active site. So we were told that they had found something. Don't know what. But they are still finding tombs there. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question, and Tanis is a very interesting site. Okay, let's see what else we got. What other questions here? Okay, and... Okay, I'll take this one from Cataphracт 3, even though he's had a couple questions tonight. Did Egyptians ever use heavy infantry in battle? Oh, yes, all the time. No, they were mostly light troops other than chariot. Heavy infantry. Now, they didn't make the distinction between light infantry and heavy infantry. They didn't make that distinction. It was just the infantry. But they did have infantry. And the infantry... The Egyptian army was arranged in essentially 4 armies. So each army had between, say, depending on the particular time period involved, 1 to about 5,000 soldiers. Roughly, in the New Kingdom period, roughly half of those would have been chariots per army. Okay? So for every chariot, you also had infantry as your support personnel. The infantry would carry spears, axes, shields, and some would carry slaver poles. So, if you went to, if you did, say, a punitive action in Levant, you'd have your chariots, engaged. The other chariots, wipe them out. Then the infantry would catch up. And then the infantry often did, sort of the same thing as infantry always does, which is sort of the grunt fighting. And they would also do, say, take the captives. Chariots weren't equipped to take captives, but the infantry was. So they did use infantry in battle. It was an important matter of their strategy to use infantry, and the Egyptian army couldn't actually go on campaign without it. But we also have indications too that sometimes it would, the chariots would get like a half a day ahead and then have to wait for the infantry to catch up. So it wasn't always that coordinated. But they did use them and heavily depended upon the infantry. So, anyway, I hope that answers the question. Interesting question. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take this one from Why. I just heard about the monotheistic pharaoh Akhenaten. Did the shift from polytheism have anything to do with the God of the Bible? No. There's a couple of no's in this. And we'll get to exactly what's going on here. Strictly speaking, Akhenaten was not monotheistic. He was monolatrous. He was pantheistic. Okay? He essentially believed that the Aten, which was the sun god he worshipped, was everything in everyone, in all creation, that people lived because of the Aten. The gods were manifestations of the Aten. He was a pantheist. He was a pure pantheist. But he was a monolatrous pantheist. So he believed that one only should worship the Aten. So it's not the same as monotheism. Monotheism says that there's one God and there's no other. And that as a consequence of its metaphysics, monotheism has a disjunct between the material world and God. There's a transcendence between the two. Pantheism doesn't have that transcendence. So Akhenaten definitely believed in a pantheistic perspective here. Now, that did actually play a role in the development of monotheism later on, but only because what happened is that it set sort of the background for later developments. Like, for example, one of the aspects about pantheism is that if you introduce theological transcendence, pantheism collapses into monotheism. And the reverse is true also, where if you have monotheism, if you have immanence, which is the opposite of transcendence, monotheism collapses into pantheism. William Lane Craig did an excellent article on this, and I think it said it was called "Send in the Pantheists," if I recall correctly. When the Israelites arrived at Mount Sinai, they had already been exposed to polytheism, pantheism, and henotheism. So they had this sort of really eclectic religious perspective when they came to Sinai. What the law at Sinai, the Ten Commandments, does is it firmly establishes theological transcendence. So whatever view they had, whether it was henotheistic or pantheistic, collapsed into monotheism as a result of the orthopraxis. This is the practical aspect of giving of the law. So with that said, anyway, I want to thank you very much for that question. It's an interesting question, but it doesn't. It influences the God of the Bible or the view of monotheism, but it doesn't have anything directly to do with the God of the Bible. So I hope that explains it. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, let's see what else here. I'll take this Lost in Victory one. When was the Egyptian pantheon formalized? Does this tell us anything about where they came from? For example, there is no camel god or horse god, but there's a scorpion and scarab god. Okay, now, this is interesting. Let's see here. What else? Now, as far as the formalization of the pantheon, there's a lot here that there wasn't actually a formalization of the pantheon. We have to. One of the things we know about, say, the development of Egyptian religion is it's progressive. It changes over time. It adds new gods, drops some in the process. So that's just like for example, the deities up until, say, first and second dynasty tend to be more animistic. They're animal deities. Like, for example, say, Seth, Horus. These are, say, really the sort of the primitive deities. And then in Dynasty 3, you get, say, the introduction of the sun god, Re. And then you start seeing sort of the pantheon sort of develop. The Osirian gods like Osiris and Isis don't really come into play until the Middle Kingdom. They exist in the Old Kingdom, but they really aren't very important in the Old Kingdom. It's really when the Osiris cult of the Middle Kingdom kings comes into the fore that it's really emphasized. And a lot of this comes down to that the pantheon is essentially also localist deities that are then sort of nationalized. You rightly point out there's no camel god, there's no horse god, and that's because in many respects the horse isn't introduced in Egypt until the Second Intermediate period. There's wild horses in Egypt, but they're not sort of, they have no military value. What I find even more interesting, there's no elephant god. There's no elephant god in Egypt. And that's very interesting, because they did import elephants. You know, there were elephants that had been had come through to Egypt across the savannah, especially during the Old Kingdom. There's no Nile monitor god. The Nile monitor is a nasty thing, and it's endemic in Egypt. But there's no Nile monitor god. So they are very selective. You don't see a lot of fish deities. Fish were a very important staple, but you don't see much in the way of fish deities. So they're selective. They're very, very selective. Not every animal was turned into a god in ancient Egypt. So there is a rabbit god. There is definitely a rabbit god. And there's actually multiple scarab gods. There's not just one of them. There's actually several of them. There's a couple of scorpion gods. There's no centipede god. They have centipedes in Egypt too. There's no centipede god. So yeah, they're selective about this. And it does seem that the local nomes. That a nome is a province. Every province had its own god, and every town had its own god. So a lot of what we see in, say, the gods of ancient Egypt tend to be more of what developed out of local religious practice as Egypt itself became more of a united kingdom. So we don't find that that the pantheon is fully canonized as such, because it changes. It really does change. For example, gods' fortunes rise and fall. Seth was a storm deity. He was a storm deity. We do know that he goes all the way back to the earliest days of Egypt, but he has an on-off sort of relationship with Egypt. He's worshipped in the Old Kingdom. He is pretty much ignored completely during the Middle Kingdom. He's sort of then elevated in status during the Second Intermediate period, and is particularly in Dynasty 19. He's big deal in Dynasty 19. And then he's vilified during the Late Period. So, let me just take that, because Heather Newt has an interesting comment here. I have heard that Seth can have a horse theophany, but I've mostly seen it about the donkey. Yeah, the Typhonian beast he's often called. We don't actually know exactly what that is. We have to claim a little ignorance here. The text doesn't tell us. In fact, the theophany we find most commonly associated with Seth is actually the pig. We find the pig to be the most common theophany associated with Seth. So, we don't find him with the horse, or, there have been some who speculated the donkey because of the shape of the muzzle and the ears of the Typhonian beast, but nobody really knows. Nobody really knows, and we don't actually have the text that, but we do have texts that connotate Set with the wild boar. So, so that's what we have for him. But it's all across the map. It's all across the map, and it's constantly changing. And this is one of the fun things about Egyptian religion is, there isn't just one point in time where it's all formal. It's all established. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for your contribution to the conversation, Hethert Newt. Okay, we got another super chat in from Vic M for $10 Canadian. If you could talk about the script on the Lahoon bilingual, Ostrika and Petrovich thinks it is Hebrew. Okay. I'm not going to talk about the Lahoon bilingual Ostrika because I haven't actually looked at it per se. I'd have to go and actually look at that particular inscription. I know Petrovich wrote a paper on this. It has been largely vilified. Petrovich's attempts to do the early alphabetic inscriptions are nothing but an embarrassment. I have nothing but the lowest contempt for his work on this matter. He's not a good epigrapher. He's really not a good epigrapher. He's a lousy epigrapher. He's got a very weak understanding of ancient languages. His most recent book, which I've had the unfortunate displeasure of reading, is just out there in left field. It's so far in left field you can't get a radar fix on it. And here's the problem with Petrovich. He will fill a text with irrelevant but factually correct information. Okay? Like his latest book is full of factually correct information. But when it comes to the relevancy of it to his argument, it just goes into Crazyville. It goes absolutely into Crazyville. And you just can't get a radar fix on it because, the stuff he says just, it's just sterile conjecture. He never proves his argument. He just states it as if it's absolute fact, and you're just supposed to take his word for it. He does the same thing with the early alphabetic inscriptions. Is basically he like his book, The World's Oldest Alphabet. He fills, and I own both his books. He fills that book with irrelevant information, and so you get that. It's almost like a gish dash, where he just sort of clogs up the argument with so much irrelevant information that you're having to sort through what's relevant to his argument and what isn't. And once you set aside everything that's not relevant, you see there's nothing to the argument. Nothing but a plain assertion. And Petrovich fails to make his case that those early alphabetic inscriptions are Hebrew. He just plain doesn't make the case. Because it's just one assertion right after the other. And, some of the craziest circular reasoning has come out of his stuff. like he says in the world's oldest alphabet, and when I read this, my jaw hit the floor, where he basically, takes Sinai 375a, and where he talks about what he calls the Ahisamic inscription. And basically he says, well, this text, the only reference we have to Ahisamic is in the Bible. And because the Bible dates the Exodus to 1446, this stela must date to 40 years before the Exodus. So, and therefore, this is a proof of the early date of the Exodus. And I sit there and I'm reading this and I'm going, did I just read this? Did he just assume the conclusion he's trying to prove? Yes. Yes, he did. So I don't take much of anything Petrovich says as credible. I was sitting on a paper of his once at ETS, and he with a straight face basically said that the Nephilim were Neanderthals. Neanderthals were Nephilim. That Neanderthals were the result of angels breeding with normal humans. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing here. This was like Crazyville. It's like he completely ignored the 100 years of academic scholarly literature on this subject. Genesis 6 is one of the most discussed texts in all of biblical literature. As I said, over 100 articles, over 100 years of academic discourse, and he just ignored it all. Yeah, I know a few scholars that are as discredited at this point as Petrovich. So, I can't talk about the Lehun Biblical Bilingual Ostracon per se until I actually read it, but I'm familiar enough with Petrovich's work to be very, very suspicious of it. Oh, yes. He is incredible when you openly have to correct one of his students. Well, yeah, unfortunately, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And well, I mean, he got a cameo. Petrovich got a cameo on IP's most recent Exodus Rediscovered video today. So, and not a good cameo. Not a good cameo. So, I'll let you be the judge of that. Okay. We got another super chat from Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is the best way to start learning Jewish Palestinian Aramaic? Are there any online lexicons? I'm sure there are, but I think bound lexicons are always much better. I've had this discussion, with people. I mean, look, I know books are expensive. I get it. I mean, I really, really understand books are expensive. Now, I will say this about Aramaic. Learn Hebrew first. Makes Aramaic easier. It makes a lot of Semitic languages a lot easier to read another foundational Semitic language first. But if you want to learn Aramaic, there's actually a fair amount of good textbooks today on Aramaic and good dictionaries as well. But do buy one that's bound, because otherwise you run the risk of these word lists. And this is really bad in, say, Egyptian. I know people who try to, like, this was one of my big beefs with Petrovich's book on the world's oldest alphabet, is that he didn't use a standard Egyptian dictionary when he did his Egyptian translations. He used a word list, compiled by some random dude on the internet. It's just crazy, and you're not going to progress if you resort to, say, online resources here. Bite the bullet, buy a good textbook, buy a good lexicon, and you'll be a lot better off. Now, the good thing about at least biblical Aramaic is that you can get good, concise Hebrew and Aramaic lexicons in one volume. If you want something really exhaustive, you can get Halot, but that's really exhaustive and really expensive. There's there's one book called the Concise Hebrew and Aramaic Lexicon, I think, of the Old Testament. It's in sort of this beige and green cover. It's very good. It's very good. It's very affordable too. It might be out of print now, but it was very good and very affordable. But the best way, get yourself a proper textbook. And that's how I would really recommend it if you want to start learning Aramaic. But I also recommend you learn Hebrew first, because there's a lot of cognates there, and that'll help you get a lot further as well. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's a great question. Okay. Going to start wrapping it up here. Joel asks, do you do work in the Ptolemaic period? No, I don't. Frankly, how do I say this? The Ptolemaic period for me is post-interesting. It's post-interesting. Really, for me, once I hit the end of the New Kingdom, once I hit the end of Dynasty 20, I'm really not all that interested anymore. I still have some interest in, say, Dynasties 21 and 22. The third intermediate period still holds some appeal to me, but once I get to Alexander the Great, I sort of just check out. And the Roman period, don't get me started. I'm not even remotely interested in the Roman period. Okay, I'm going to take exception here to one thing here. I'm actually going to take exception to this here. I actually think Faulkner's dictionary on Middle Egyptian is actually very good. Okay? And here's why I'm going to say it. I did a lot of lexicography. I've done a lot of it. That's one of the things I specialized in for my dissertation. When you are dealing with dictionaries, you, especially in Egyptian, you don't have a lot of choice. Okay? You have the Vertibook, which is Zatha's 1920-ish book. You have Hanig's update of the Vertibook. You have Lesko's essentially compiled word list. When I did work with, say, Faulkner's Concise Dictionary of Middle Egyptian, first of all, it's cited. He cites where he gets his readings from. That's incredibly valuable. Second of all, he was not a slouch on his lexicography. I ended up agreeing more with Faulkner than I did with Zatha. Okay. Okay. Let me go. Okay. That's actually a valid point. Maybe it's the PDF I have. I cannot understand it. Yes, I got a handwritten copy. Yes, that's the problem with it. That is the one problem with it, is that it's handwritten. We have to understand, though, that a lot of these dictionaries prior to computational typesetting were handwritten. Okay? The Vertibook is handwritten. The Vertibook is handwritten. You talk about difficult to read. Zatha is a lot more difficult to read than Faulkner is. Now, once you have to really get into Faulkner. You have to really... It takes you a while to sort of get used to his handwriting. Okay? But the quality of the scholarship here is exceptionally good. For a dictionary of Egyptian, it is exceptionally good. It's short, but what's there is really, really excellent. Okay? So you're not mistaken in that it's handwritten. They're all handwritten. They're all handwritten. That's the Concise Dictionary, and it comes from the 1960s. I think it's his book is copyrighted 65. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's all handwritten. But he mentions where he got every reading, and that is so unusual in dictionaries it isn't even funny. Lesko's a late Egyptian dictionary. While it's the only one of its kind, it's not up to the same caliber as Faulkner. Not even close to the same caliber. Hannock is good, but it's incomplete. And there was a compliment, supposed to be a compliment, to say Zatha's Wörterbuch, which is the Belegstellen. Now, the Belegstellen was supposed to have a lot of the references that Zatha used in his lexicography work. And essentially, that project ended prematurely because of World War II. So that's one of those unfortunate things that, a really good effort was brought to an end prematurely because of the war. However, one of the things is Sir Alan Gardner wrote a article, and he basically calls it a review article of the first 20 entries of the Wörterbuch. I think it was 20 entries or maybe 20 pages. My memory is not as keen on that. But he wrote this review article on just the very opening of Zatha's Wörterbuch. And Gardner didn't mince words. Gardner basically said that, almost every entry in the Wörterbuch needs improvement. Now, the Wörterbuch was Zatha's magnum opus. This is his magnum opus. And here's a guy like Gardner coming along saying, yeah, well, it ain't that good. Needs improvement. Everywhere it needs improvement. Faulkner was a student of Gardner. He was a student of Gardner. Gardner hated students, but, he was, Faulkner was Gardner's acolyte. And Faulkner is very Gardnerian in his approach to lexicography. And that really comes out in the lexicon. So I wouldn't throw it away. Definitely don't throw it away. You just have to get used to it. And I will say this. It's easier to use if you've got a bound copy, like all these things. So it is handwritten. You do need to get used to his handwriting. It's very true of actually a lot of Egyptian texts, because you are going to be, if you do a lot of work in Egyptology, very few of the texts you are actually going to read are typeset. So you have to get used to other people's handwriting. You basically become a double epigrapher. You're not only dealing with the epigraphy of the ancient writer, you're also dealing with the the epigraphy of the modern scholar too. So it's a skill you pick up. You do pick up, but you have to persevere through it. And frankly, I'll admit too, when I first got Faulkner's dictionary, I can't make heads or tails of his handwriting. I couldn't make heads or tails when I first got it, but eventually you just get used to it. So anyway, it's a great dictionary. It's actually one of the best. Dictionaries. Good question though, very good question, and it was a good comment. And I get where you're coming from on this. Okay, we'll take a couple more questions, and then we're going to call it a night because we've been going for 2.5 hours. We do have a super chat from Murray of Sweden for 100 Swedish krona. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. What are your thoughts on timelines based on biblical genealogies? I think they're rubbish. Can they be made into a somewhat reliable way, or is the margin of error simply too large? It's not the margin of error that's the problem. The problem with the genealogies is that the honorific transposition is taking place here. So there's no way to actually know how long the clans of these genealogies survive. Now, these are clan genealogies. These are not individual genealogies. That's really important to stress. Each name in the, like, for example, Genesis 5 and Genesis 11 represents a clan and the creation of a new clan. So you get this structure was X lived so and so, and then he begat such and such. At age such and such, he begat, such and such, and then lived such years, and then died. It's the spawning of a new clan. It's what's going on in these genealogies. The problem is because we have honorific transposition going on, that date that the father begat isn't actually directly tied to the person being mentioned, but the firstborn of the clan, not its most important member. And clans are named after their most important member. So this makes the genealogies, the Toledot, completely unsuitable for any type of timeline construction. You just can't do it. It just will not work. There isn't a reliable way of doing this because it's not meant to be used in this way. What it's meant to do is honor the patriarch who created the new clan and tell you who the new clan, most important member of that new clan is. That's all those Toledots are there to do. They're not... Basically, how long did each clan survive? And what is the lineage of the clans? So anyway, I hope that helped answer the question, but there's just no way to do this in any way that makes logical sense. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that answered your question. Nathan Yadone comments, I remember the times when these streams only lasted an hour, and then it became an hour and a half, and then maybe 2 hours. Yeah, I think some people are starting to get their all-day live stream wish come true. That's not going to happen, by the way. Okay, I will take one last question, and then I am going to call it a night. So, because I've been going on here for a while. All right, I'll take this last one. And this will be the last... I'm going to take this as the last question of the night. Unless someone slips in a super chat, in which case we'll take that too. But this will be the last non-super chat. And if we get no more super chats, then we're going to call it a night here. Because we've been going on for 2.5 hours. So, Rohan Samuel says, according to Dr. John Walton, Abraham did not speak Hebrew, and it's even questionable whether that Moses spoke what could be called Hebrew. Do you agree with him? For the most part, yes, I do. And here's the reason I agree with him. Essentially, Abraham comes from the region of Urkesh, which is in northern Mesopotamia. Now, Urkesh, the language in question there is a form of Akkadian, so it's a East Semitic dialect. It's not Hebrew, and it won't become Hebrew. Because what's going to happen is, Abraham's in the Levant. He's sojourning, but he's essentially talking a West Semitic dialect. Now, that's probably sufficient enough for him to be able to talk to other people in the Levant who are speaking West Semitic dialects. And Hebrew is a West Semitic dialect. So I think it's pretty much agreed across the board that Abraham did not speak Hebrew. But he spoke Akkadian. And it's very, very clear that Abraham is very, very familiar with Akkadian literature, Mesopotamian literature, because they're all doing things according to the law codes of Mesopotamia. So it's very clear sort of where his cultural background is coming from. So I think it's very clear that Hebrew was not a spoken language at that point. Now, Moses, fast forward, 400 years. Uh, Moses, it's a little more, how to say, fuzzy, because what you have at Avaris is where the Israelites are basically make their home is an Amoritic dialect. And we're talking here now, again, a West Semitic dialect, but it's not quite Hebrew yet either. But it does go under that transformation. So what we can say is happening at Avaris is sort of a creolization, where the language changes because of its isolation to its sort of mother tongue. So what you have in happening at Avaris is that, the Hyksos were Amorite Semites. They were the Amorite rulers of Avaris. You had a mixed Semitic, Egyptian, Libyan population, living at Avaris. And so what's going to happen under those conditions is you're going to get this sort of interchange of various different languages. And it seems to be that when the Israelites sort of come out of Egypt, they are no longer speaking pure Amorite. They're speaking this Creole. And that develops into classical or Old Hebrew. Now, what John Walton here is referring to is the fact that what Moses wrote when he wrote the text of the Pentateuch was probably later standardized into classical Hebrew. That there was basically a base text that was updated to reflect, say, what the language became. Now, we have to understand, too, that the language that the Israelites spoke when they left Egypt, that Amoritic dialect, is going to change in 40 years of wandering in the desert, in the Sinai. Because their only sort of interaction they're going to have from then on is no longer with Egyptians, but with other Semitic groups that are wandering Sinai. And the Sinai at that time was full of wandering groups, because there were still people from Midian pasteurizing their flocks. They're speaking a Canaanite dialect. We do know that the Israelites had a lot of interaction with the Midianites. We do know that that there was Amalekites out there. A large group of various groups of people were out there at the time. There was tribes living up in Kedar, which is sort of that northeastern portion of the Sinai, I think. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the Sinai there that shapes that original Amoritic dialect to what will then become classical Hebrew. So I think that's what's going on there, is that you have in the case of Moses, he leaves, he's speaking Moses would have been trained in Akkadian because he was schooled in the house of the governor of Ramses, the governor at Avaris, who was Ramses the First. He was he would have known, say, the local dialect, the local Amoritic dialect, and he would have known Egyptian. And and then over time, as he does more and more Semitic languages and makes that sort of his native, sort of his primary language, I think that very much develops into Hebrew. And so when he does, put the Torah to pen, it comes out Hebrew, because he's so used to that point, speaking the Semitic dialect that is just sort of now the common tongue of the Israelite people. Something similar happened actually with German. Prior to Martin Luther, you had 20 or 200 German duchies, little states. There wasn't a unified Germany. And it didn't speak all one dialect of German. every German, principality had its own version of German. When Luther translates the Bible into German, he also ends up creating a systematic, a codified systematic German that's then widely adopted across all the principalities of Germany, all the German states. So, just by writing the translation of the Bible, Martin Luther also ends up standardizing German. And I think that's what's happening a lot in, say, the linguistics of early Israelite culture, is that it starts off this potpourri of languages, and then when the texts of the Torah are actually set to parchment, then Hebrew becomes standardized through the writing of the text. And that further is refined over time as, say, maybe Joshua edits the Moses' papers. So there's a lot of complexity here in the dynamics of language that we have to consider as we look at the original source languages, for the patriarchs and for Moses. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. It's a great way to end this because it's a very interesting question. We're talking here about the development of languages. Fascinating subject. So anyway, we are going to call it a night now because we're no more super chats. And I want to thank everyone who joined us for the live stream tonight. It was great to have you guys out here today. I would encourage you to go watch Michael Jones's Inspiring Philosophies, Exodus Rediscovered, and give the video a like if you found it helpful. It was I have to admit, it was a great thrill to work with Michael on that project. But so I want to make sure that all my subscribers at least view it. It's a great. The production values are out of this world. I mean, he always does a great job of this. So anyway, I want to thank all my subscribers who watch us on Fridays and who support our channel through watching our videos. I want to thank everyone who donated a super chat tonight. We don't survive without those super chats. They're our lifeblood. They really are. We couldn't do this channel without them. So plainly speaking, it's just we don't beg for money, but we appreciate all the donations we get because we do live on a shoestring, and this really helps us. And finally, I also want to thank our Patreon supporters who don't get enough credit and are sort of the unsung heroes in this. They provide basically the funds for improving our equipment and improving our production values. And slowly over time, we are improving our production values. We are trying to do better. So anyway, with that said, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. It was such a pleasure to have you here. And there were so many great questions. I just love this. I just love the questions. So anyway, I want to wish you all a good night, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.